Fuck off, man. Brutal words from Hamilton to Leclerc in the paddock after the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Stay until the end to see Leclerc's unexpected response. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. As the engines cooled and the tension simmered beneath the surface in Parc Ferme, what had begun as a fiercely contested race transformed into an emotionally charged eruption that left teams, fans, and commentators in stunned disbelief. Lewis Hamilton, helmet still on, stormed out of his Mercedes cockpit, his body language betraying the tightly coiled frustration that had built up over the final agonizing laps. The Mercedes mechanics stood frozen, eyes darting between the telemetry screens and the smoldering expressions of both their driver and the Ferrari team just meters away. Charles Leclerc had already exited his Scarlet car, throwing his gloves onto the cockpit and yanking off his balaclava with the kind of jerky, irritated motions that betray a cocktail of adrenaline, regret, and raw anger. The atmosphere was electric, not with celebration, but with the unmistakable charge of impending confrontation. Hamilton walked directly toward Leclerc, ignoring the team officials who reached out to restrain him. The cameras captured every frame of the moment, an unblinking close-up as the seven-time world champion stood face-to-face with a Monegasque driver, exchanging a few words that microphones couldn't catch but body language made unmistakable. Hamilton's gloved hand pointed sharply toward Variante Alta, mimicking the movement that had nearly sent him into the barriers. Leclerc, not one to back down, raised his hands in a half-dismissive, half-defensive gesture and fired back, his voice rising above the ambient noise. His words were laced with frustration, claiming Hamilton had no right to expect a gift in a battle like that. A crowd had begun to gather, media personnel, mechanics, and FIA stewards forming a silent semicircle around the escalating confrontation. Team principals Toto Wolff and Frederic Vasseur were summoned almost simultaneously. Wolff, usually the composed architect of calm at Mercedes, looked genuinely incensed, muttering under his breath as he approached. Vasseur arrived moments later, exchanging a look with Leclerc that suggested this was not how they envisioned their weekend ending. Wolff demanded an immediate steward review, despite the incident having been ruled a racing incident during the race. The Mercedes garage had data they believed proved Leclerc's swerve caused the contact and resultant damage. Wolff's voice trembled with rage and disbelief as he replayed the onboard footage in front of the FIA delegate, jabbing a finger at the screen and highlighting the brake pressure and steering angle overlays. This wasn't a move. This was a move to destroy a race, he fumed, insisting it was reckless endangerment masked as hard racing. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Meanwhile, Leclerc, now surrounded by Ferrari engineers and PR staff, remained unrepentant. He gave a brief interview to Sky Sports, his jaw tight, saying, "I'm here to race. I'm not here to wave anyone through, regardless of who they are or how many titles they have." The comment, though subtle, was a clear shot at Hamilton's status. The fan reactions online were immediate and explosive. Hashtags like #LeclercDefense and #HamiltonDeservedBetter trended simultaneously. TikTok was flooded with side-by-side comparisons of the incident from every conceivable angle, some slow-motion edits showing Leclerc's right mirror glance moments before the swerve, feeding conspiracy theories that the move was premeditated payback for past on-track duels. What complicated the matter further was team radio audio that was released later by FOM. During lap 45, just before the incident, Leclerc had asked his engineer, "Do I defend hard, or do I think about the tires?" The response from the Ferrari pit wall was ominously vague, "You do what you need to. He's coming fast." Some interpreted this as a coded green light to defend at all costs, even at the risk of contact. In contrast, Mercedes radio was more surgical. Engineers told Hamilton to go for it at Variante, he's bleeding time there, suggesting they had pinpointed the exact corner of vulnerability. The precision of the strategy only made the fallout more painful for Mercedes, who had executed a near-perfect recovery race only to see it implode on a single corner. Behind the scenes, team staff scrambled to manage the media storm. Mercedes filed a formal request for a review, citing new evidence from telemetry and Hamilton's onboard camera. Ferrari responded with a statement dismissing the claims as a desperate attempt to rewrite a clean, albeit intense, battle. Tension spilled over into the press conference, where both drivers were seated just one chair apart. Hamilton, still visibly simmering, refused to shake Leclerc's hand when the moderator tried to begin on a cordial note. When asked directly if he thought Leclerc had acted deliberately, Hamilton paused, looked straight into the camera, and said, "I'll let the footage speak for itself. But respect is earned, not assumed." Leclerc's reply was equally ice-cold: "I race hard." If that bothers some people, maybe they're in the wrong sport. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Insiders from both camps leaked details of internal discussions. Mercedes engineers were reportedly livid at the FIA's initial decision not to penalize, citing inconsistencies with prior rulings where lesser offenses had led to 5-second penalties or more. Some even brought up past grievances: Silverstone 2021, Monza 2019, highlighting a pattern of ambiguity when it came to Hamilton's on-track altercations. On the Ferrari side, whispers emerged that Leclerc had been under immense pressure from upper management, especially given recent rumors about his contract negotiations and the arrival of a yet unannounced new technical director who was evaluating driver performance as part of a long-term rebuild. Leclerc's aggressive move might have been as much about making a statement within Ferrari as it was about defending against Hamilton. In the paddock that night, the mood was uneasy. Drivers from other teams weighed in. Lando Norris called the incident 50-50, while Max Verstappen, in a rare moment of neutrality, shrugged it off with a smirk, saying, "It's racing. Sometimes you give a little. Sometimes you take a little too much." Fernando Alonso, however, was less diplomatic, stating, "If I had done what Charles did today, I'd have been penalized in a heartbeat." The comments stirred more debate about inconsistency in stewarding and whether reputations influence decisions. By the time the teams began packing up, the ripple effects were already in motion. FIA officials confirmed that the incident would be reviewed post-race under Article 14 of the Sporting Code, which allows for the reopening of incidents with new evidence. Hamilton left the circuit without giving a final debrief to the media, while Leclerc remained behind to meet with senior Ferrari personnel in a closed-door session that reportedly lasted over an hour. Speculation ran rampant. Was Ferrari about to reprimand their star driver, or back him publicly and challenge the FIA's authority? The fallout extended well beyond the garages. Former champions and analysts took to social media and late-night shows to dissect the incident frame by frame, comparing telemetry data and debating intent versus consequence. The drama reignited broader conversations about driving standards, steward consistency, and the psychological warfare that plays out at 300 kilometers per hour. It was no longer just about a race. It was about legacy, pride, and the thin line between competitive fire and dangerous recklessness. As the dust settled in Imola, it became clear this Grand Prix would not be remembered for its winner, or for strategy brilliance, but for the moment two of Formula One's biggest stars collided, physically, emotionally, and ideologically. The collision at Variante Alta may not have ended either driver's race outright, but it lit a fuse that would burn through the rest of the season, redefining rivalries and reshaping narratives in a sport where the margin between glory and disaster is often no more than the width of a tire. As the engines fell silent and the roar of the crowd began to fade into the background, the drivers climbed out of their cockpits, each one drenched in sweat and adrenaline, faces still marked by the emotional toll of one of the most intense races of the season. Mechanics, engineers, and media personnel swarmed the pit lane, all eyes shifting to the two men who had defined the Grand Prix, not by who had won, but by the dangerous, inches-from-disaster battle that had unfolded in the final laps. Charles Leclerc, jaw tight and fists clenched, made his way toward the line of drivers gathering for the ritualistic post-race handshakes. Lewis Hamilton, helmet under his arm and expression unreadable behind his dark visor, took a sharp left turn and headed straight for him. The cameras, already focused and anticipating something tense, zoomed in instinctively. As the two rivals approached, the air between them grew heavier by the second, thick with years of unspoken animosity, recent on-track grievances, and the weight of reputations that refused to coexist. Leclerc extended his hand, a move meant to show sportsmanship, maybe even reconciliation, but Hamilton didn't even pretend to play along. He grabbed Leclerc's hand with firm pressure, pulled him slightly forward, leaned in almost forehead to forehead, and hissed through clenched teeth, "Fuck off, man." There was no ambiguity in his tone. It wasn't playful, it wasn't subtle, it was cold, calculated, and laced with contempt. Leclerc froze mid-gesture, his face draining of color as the moment registered. He yanked his hand back instantly as if stung by a live wire, his mouth twitching in shock and fury. He muttered something in rapid-fire French, indecipherable to the microphones but sharp enough that a nearby Sky Sports camera operator raised an eyebrow and instinctively moved closer. For a split second, the entire paddock seemed to pause. Then it exploded. Leclerc stepped forward, ignoring every protocol and every camera, ignoring the prying eyes of millions watching the live broadcast. "You think you can talk to me like that after what you did out there?" His voice was hard, full of disbelief and pure anger. "You were driving like a maniac. You're completely out of control." Hamilton didn't back down, not even half a step. His breathing was heavy, eyes locked on Leclerc, every muscle in his body tight and ready. "Driving like a maniac," he echoed, voice raised now. "You nearly put me in the goddamn wall on lap 42. I had nowhere to go. You weren't defending, you were desperate." People began moving closer, Mercedes engineers first, then Ferrari staff, then stewards. Whispers started flying around the pit lane. Media teams started pulling out their phones to film, just in case the broadcast missed anything. The tension was now a live wire snapping wildly between the two men. Leclerc's finger jabbed toward Hamilton's chest. "If you had any sense left in you, you'd know when to back the hell off. You think every single corner is your goddamn birthright. This isn't 2020, Lewis. People fight back now. You're not untouchable anymore." Hamilton's face twisted into something darker. "You're not fighting, Charles. You're playing games with people's lives. You don't respect limits. You don't respect danger. You're acting like a kid in a kart race while we're pulling 6GS at 300 clicks." The insults weren't just personal anymore. They were professional, existential. Each word cut at the other's core identity as a driver, as a competitor, as a man. That was when Frederic Vasseur came charging in like a man who had seen this play out before in his nightmares. His face was red with frustration, one hand outstretched toward Leclerc, the other toward Hamilton. "Stop it. Both of you," he yelled, voice trembling with the kind of urgency that silences paddocks. "This is not the place. This is not who we are. Walk away now before this gets worse." But it was already too late. Neither of them moved. Hamilton's jaw was locked. Leclerc's fists were clenched. More people came running, Mercedes comms director, a couple of FIA stewards, even some Red Bull crew who had been spectating nearby and realized this was spiraling fast. Cameras were shoved aside. Someone dropped a water bottle. Someone else knocked over a timing monitor. The television broadcast quickly cut back to the commentators, clearly instructed to shift the focus before things escalated further on screen. But it didn't matter. Word spread like wildfire. Radio channels between the teams buzzed with chatter. WhatsApp groups among journalists lit up with screenshots. Within minutes, footage began to circulate on social media from unofficial sources. Clips showing Hamilton's cold whisper, Leclerc's stunned reaction, the furious finger jabbing, Vasseur's desperate intervention. Thousands of fans paused their Sunday afternoons to hit replay again and again. Inside the paddock, team PR teams were already panicking, drafting statements, trying to calculate how to spin this in their favor. Toto Wolff was seen making an urgent call. Ferrari's head of communications disappeared into the motorhome with a furious look on her face. Meanwhile, Hamilton and Leclerc had finally been separated physically, but both continued shouting over the crowd. "You're reckless." Hamilton roared. "You're arrogant." Leclerc shot back. Later, rumors began swirling that the stewards were reviewing not just the race footage but the post-race confrontation. Penalties were being discussed, not for lap incidents, but for behavior unbecoming of drivers representing elite teams. The FIA press office went silent, which only made the speculation louder. In the garage, Carlos Sainz looked visibly uncomfortable as reporters hounded him for comment. George Russell tried to deflect questions with a smirk, but it was clear even he was rattled. In the press conference that followed, where both drivers were required to appear, Hamilton sat stiffly, sunglasses on, arms crossed, refusing to answer any question about the incident. Leclerc was equally frosty, delivering curt answers and glaring across the table whenever Hamilton spoke. No handshake. No eye contact. Just silence and animosity thick enough to choke on. By nightfall, every major motorsport outlet had pushed the confrontation as their lead story. Former drivers weighed in. Fans picked sides. Hashtags began trending worldwide. Hashtag Hamilton versus Leclerc dominated Twitter. Old footage of previous near collisions between them resurfaced. Analysts began dissecting every frame, every radio message. What had started as a post-race handshake had now ignited a feud that was destined to shadow the rest of the season, and possibly redefine it. Behind closed doors, team principals scrambled to prevent fallout. Mercedes considered pushing Hamilton to issue an apology. Ferrari debated whether to discipline Leclerc. But neither man wanted to back down. The wounds were fresh, the emotions real, and whatever fragile respect had existed between them had now shattered completely. Later in the paddock, Hamilton stormed past the media scrum without uttering a single word. His jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and disbelief. His fireproof top was half-zipped, clinging to his chest as beads of sweat glistened under the fluorescent lights of the hospitality zone. Every stride he took toward the back of the Mercedes motorhome echoed with restrained rage. A mechanic tried to offer him a bottle of water, but he brushed past without acknowledging it. Inside, Toto Wolff was hunched over telemetry screens, surrounded by a circle of tense engineers who were dissecting sector data, trying to understand how a solid points finish had disintegrated in the span of one brutal maneuver. The moment Lewis entered, the room's energy shifted. His presence was like an electric charge. He peeled off the fireproof top in one swift, irritated motion, flinging it over the back of a chair before tossing his gloves onto the carbon fiber table. His breathing was heavy, not from physical exertion, but from the sheer emotional weight of what had just transpired. Toto turned slowly, reading the storm on his driver's face before speaking. "Lewis," he said with a calm that only barely concealed his own frustration. "What the hell happened out there with Charles? Everyone saw it. We've already got Sky Sports rerunning the clip from 5 angles." Hamilton didn't answer immediately. He walked to the far end of the room, looking out the tinted window that offered a partial view of the Ferrari garage across the paddock. Then he turned, eyes locked onto Toto's. "He blocked me. On purpose. Not just some late defense. He waited until I was fully committed, then slammed the door on me like it was the casino hairpin and he was trying to wreck me." Toto glanced at the lead engineer, who nodded solemnly. "Telemetry confirms sudden steering input from Leclerc just before the apex," the engineer added quietly. "Lewis lost around 7.9 points of downforce, immediate understeer, offline trajectory. No way that's incidental." Hamilton took a deep breath, but it came out shaky. "You know what the worst part is?" He had that smug look afterward. Like he pulled off some genius defensive move. "I've raced long enough to know when a guy's on the edge and when he's over it. That wasn't racing. That was retaliation. He's been pissed since Bahrain when I cut across him at turn 4. He's been waiting for a moment like this." Toto sat down slowly at the table and gestured for Lewis to join him, his voice measured. "Listen, I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what you saw. We've pulled the onboard from his car. It's dirty. Subtle enough that he'll deny it, but clear enough to make a case. The stewards are reviewing it, but we both know how political this can get. Ferrari's going to argue it's hard racing, the fans will eat it up, and the FIA will hesitate to penalize him unless it's black and white." Hamilton sat, but only barely, his posture stiff, like he might spring back up at any second. "I don't care what the FIA does. I care about respect. You know me, Toto. I've fought wheel to wheel with some of the best, Seb, Fernando, even Max when he wasn't being reckless. But Charles? He's got this chip on his shoulder, like he needs to prove something every damn lap. And today, he proved he doesn't care if we both end up in the barriers as long as he looks like a hero on the highlight reel." There was a pause as Toto studied Lewis. The fire in his eyes wasn't just frustration, it was something deeper, more personal. A sense of betrayal. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," Toto said, voice low but firm. "But I am asking you not to let him get into your head. That's how they win. Not just on track, but mentally. You let this fester, and it eats into your performance. You start racing angry, and the next mistake is yours. That's not you. That's never been you." Lewis's hands balled into fists on the table. "It's not personal, but it is about standards. You race a certain way because you know the guy next to you respects the craft. The risks. The margins. He's lost that. He's out there like it's a video game. And if I don't call it out, who will? The stewards? The media? They love the drama. But if one of us ends up in the hospital, then suddenly everyone's asking why nobody said something sooner." Toto leaned back, fingers steepled, his mind already calculating next steps: PR management, strategic debriefing, potential FIA protests, damage control. But more than that, he was trying to read the mental state of his most experienced driver. "We'll take it to the stewards. And if they sweep it under the rug, we escalate. Quietly. Politely. but firmly. "I'll handle that. You, stay focused. Let Ferrari eat themselves alive with that kind of driving. You be the surgeon out there. Precise. Clinical. You see Leclerc next time, you pass him clean. But don't give him an inch more than necessary. And whatever you do, don't give him the satisfaction of knowing he rattled you." Hamilton's eyes narrowed, his voice quieter now, but colder. He wants a war? Fine. But he better be ready for the consequences. Because next time, I won't lift. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The only sound in the room was the hum of electronics and the distant roar of fans outside. Finally, Toto stood up, straightened his shirt collar, and looked down at Lewis. "We've got 16 races left. Championships aren't won with emotion. They're won with execution. Keep your powder dry, Lewis. When the time is right, you'll answer him the way only you can, on the stopwatch." Hamilton nodded slowly, but the fire in his eyes didn't fade. It simmered. Waiting. Calculating. Because for Lewis Hamilton, respect wasn't given lightly. And once it was lost, it could only be reclaimed on track, in tenths in apexes, and in the silence after a checkered flag when revenge wasn't shouted but earned. Outside the motorhome, chaos had already taken on a life of its own. Camera flashes lit up the paddock like a war zone. Reporters were sprinting between team areas, desperately trying to verify conflicting stories that were spreading like wildfire across the media landscape. The clip of the failed handshake had already reached tens of millions of views within hours, replayed in every conceivable format, from meme compilations to frame-by-frame analysis videos. The insult mouthed by Hamilton had become an international sensation, with lip readers on TikTok, Reddit, and even late-night talk shows giving their own interpretations. "He said what?" became the trending phrase of the night, printed in bold across tabloids in both Monaco and London. Every major outlet was running with its own narrative. ESPN called it a Cold War that finally turned hot. The BBC described it as a psychological breakdown between two titans of the sport. Even outlets normally detached from motorsport were covering it, treating the handshake as though it were a geopolitical incident. In the paddock, Sky Sports had already devoted an entire hour-long segment to the fallout. Martin Brundle and Karun Chandok broke down the chicane incident from every conceivable angle, using heat maps, telemetry overlays, and cockpit audio to dissect the moment of contact, even debating whether Leclerc's steering angle suggested deliberate squeezing. Social media sentiment was brutal and divided. Hamilton fans cried foul, accusing Leclerc of dirty driving and unprofessionalism. Leclerc supporters fired back, calling Hamilton entitled, washed up, and unwilling to accept that the new generation wouldn't bow to his legacy. Meanwhile, meme pages were already circulating images of the two drivers photoshopped into historical duels, Hamilton as Julius Caesar, Leclerc as Brutus. Within the Ferrari garage, the atmosphere was toxic. Leclerc had stormed out of the engineering debrief, refusing to answer any questions about his tire degradation or overtaking strategy. He was seen pacing outside the team trailer, surrounded by his personal staff, muttering in French and Italian about how he was always the scapegoat whenever he dared to stand his ground. At the press conference, he gave curt, sharp answers, his jaw clenched and his body language defensive. When a reporter asked if he regretted how he defended the corner, his glare was ice cold. "If Lewis wants people to move out of the way, maybe he should go back to karting," he replied. The room fell silent. The implication was clear. Leclerc didn't just see the incident as a racing matter. He saw it as a generational power play, and he wasn't going to back down. Hamilton, only 2 seats away, sat like a statue. He didn't flinch. He didn't respond. When asked about the incident, his voice was calm, but the fury simmered just beneath the surface. "You can race hard without being reckless," he said. That wasn't hard racing. That was desperation. Then came the question about the handshake, a moment that had been played on loop across global media. Hamilton smirked slightly, then dropped the line that would be quoted for weeks. "Not every handshake is sincere." Today was one of those days. No names. No raised voice. But the message was unmistakable. The air between them was so tense it could have snapped. As dusk settled over Imola, the FIA's emergency lights were still on in the control room. Team principals had been summoned into urgent meetings, with both Toto Wolff and Fred Vasseur entering the FIA hospitality suite within 10 minutes of each other, avoiding eye contact as cameras tracked their every move. The official word was a routine debrief, but insiders knew better. There was fear, not just of an escalating feud, but of potential implications for the rest of the season. The sport had been teetering on the edge of civility for years, but this was something more dangerous. This was personal. There were whispers that Hamilton had refused to attend the traditional post-race dinner organized by the Italian Grand Prix committee. His statement, relayed by a spokesperson, was surgical in its ambiguity. Lewis regrets he cannot attend due to recent events and unprofessional conduct displayed by certain individuals. No names. Again. But the shadow cast by that sentence reached the entire paddock. Back-channel communications among sponsors, team board members, and even ex-drivers started circulating. Everyone had an opinion. Nico Rosberg, who knew a thing or two about internal driver rivalries, hinted on air that this one might get uglier before it gets better. Sebastian Vettel, present as an honorary guest that weekend, reportedly pulled Leclerc aside after the race, offering words of caution, not support, not blame, but a warning about where unchecked emotion can lead in a sport that punishes weakness and thrives on narrative. The ramifications weren't just psychological. The data teams began to report driver reluctance to share setup details. Engineers from both Mercedes and Ferrari noticed a subtle, yet distinct breakdown in communication between the camps. Hamilton's telemetry was no longer being fully shared in joint simulator sessions. Leclerc reportedly asked for a separate briefing room for future race weekends. What had started as a chicane squabble was now threatening to tear open fault lines that could fracture not just a season, but entire team dynamics. Meanwhile, the fans were loving every second of it. Engagement numbers soared. Subscription spikes hit F1 TV and various streaming platforms. Merchandise sales for both drivers surged, albeit with fans now picking clear sides. T-shirts that read Old Guard and New Blood began popping up on fan sites overnight. The sport hadn't seen this level of tribalism since the peak of the Hamilton-Vettel era, and even then, the vitriol hadn't quite reached this pitch. Inside F1's power circles, Liberty Media executives, key sponsors, and broadcast stakeholders, the situation was being viewed with both trepidation and glee. Conflict sells. Drama draws eyes. But if this feud boiled over into on-track retaliation, or worse, public fallout that involved national sponsors, the consequences could be seismic. A line had been crossed. A spark had been lit. And as the paddock trucks began rolling out of Imola under the soft glow of the Italian moonlight, everyone knew one thing with absolute certainty: this wasn't over. This was only the beginning of a battle that would redefine not just a championship, but the legacy of two of Formula One's most compelling gladiators.